Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'm your host, Jason Aiken, and this week's episode is titled The Adventures of Pat Wildman on the Trail of the Wild Huntsman. And joining me today for this episode is author Win Scott Eckert. How's it going, Win?
Hey, Jason. It's going great. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for being on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no sweat. And also joining us is Chuck Loredens. How's it going, Chuck?
I'm the thing that wouldn't leave. I'm still here. I never left from the last episode. I'm just kind of hanging out. How you going? How's it going, guys?
Good.
Going good, Chuck.
I'm just here sleeping on Jason's couch, People come in and goes. All right.
Nice. Well, first we're going to talk about Pat Wildman and her adventures. There's been two Pat Wildman books that have been released. The first was The Evil in Pemberley House, which Wynne co-wrote with Philip Jose Farmer. And the most recent book has been The Scarlet Jaguar, which Wynne wrote solo. And we're going to first open up talking about The Evil in Pemberley House. And Wynne, I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about how this book came into being, what it was like working with Philip Jose Farmer on it, and a little bit about the plot.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. So, The Evil in Pemberley House came out in its first edition in limited hardcover from Subterranean Press in 2009, and it went out of print in less than a year. And it's back in print now in a more affordable trade softcover edition from Meteor House. And the ebook is also coming very soon, I'm told, which is great news. But it's Pat Wildman series book number 1. And even though it first came out in 2009, really started working on it all the way back in, frankly, 2005 and 2006. I discovered the manuscript, the partial manuscript, I should say, which was written by Philip Jose Farmer at a time which is not exactly clear to us, but which we think was the early 1970s. And he wrote several chapters, and he had a full outline for it, and then for whatever reason, he tucked it away. And, there was actually a lot of stuff that some of us have found in Phil's, what we like to call his magic filing cabinet, which was in the basement of his house in Peoria. And several of us who were working with Phil at the time, we were very lucky to be able to go and visit him at his house. And we went at least once a year. And my first visit was in July of 2005, when Mike Croteau, who runs Phil's official homepage, pjfarmer.com, invited me to go to meet Phil and Betty. So this was my first trip to meet them. I had a Wold Newton fan page up for quite some time at that point, and I was fortunate enough to get an invitation to get to meet Phil and his wife Betty in person. And beyond that, when they very graciously let me into their house and invited me to stay over, in a guest bedroom, they also let me have access to the magic filing cabinet in the basement down there with Mike. And they just let us go. And they were so, they were just wonderful, wonderful people. And it was wonderful to be a fan of Phil's, and to be, frankly, a fan of both Phil and Betty, his wife. They were just great people. So, very first time in Peoria, first time meeting Phil, and Mike and I are down in the basement looking through the magic filing cabinet for material for the fan prozine that Mike was publishing called Farmer File at the time. And I pull out a manila file folder, And I looked at the tab, and it said Pemberley House on it, and I thought to myself, Pemberley House, Pemberley House. I mean, that's Jane Austen, and I knew from being very well versed with Phil's Wold Newton biographies, Tarzan Alive, and his second biography, Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life, that that Fitzwilliam Darcy and his wife Elizabeth Bennet were at the Wold Newton meteor strike, and of course Darcy was the owner of Pemberley House. So immediately I'm thinking to myself, this is something to do with Wold Newton, and I've never heard of it before. And I opened it up, and the very first chapter opens with a character named Patricia Wildman. And at that point, being the fan of a certain bronze-skinned pulp hero, I was just sort of over the moon.
Your heart started beating rapidly.
Yeah. I think it was even. I think there was screaming and yelling involved, and I think Mike probably thought I had just gone insane. And of course, that was the first time I met Mike in person too. So everybody's probably thinking, "Who's this crazy guy that we just let into our house who's yelling and screaming in the basement?" But Wildman was Phil's name. Phil, in his biographies, he revealed the real names of the pulp heroes, and Wildman was the real last name of the Bronze Man, according to Phil, right? And Pat, of course, harkens back to the bronze-skinned pulp hero's cousin, Patricia. Of course, this story was not about the cousin. This was about the daughter, Pat Wildman. It took place in the 1970s. And it was an amazing find, and it went from there. And fortunately, I was able to have the trust and the great working relationship with Phil, and he allowed me working in concert with him to finish the book under his guidance.
This was actually one of two projects that came from the Magic Filing Cabinet. One of the previous guests that Jason's had is Christopher Paul Carey, who also found a fragment, or who actually found that one, the Opar, the Song of Quasine.
Well, I don't. So Chris will probably correct me because he's going to remember all the details about his manuscript better than I will. But I'm pretty sure that Mike and I found it.
Okay.
On that same trip.
But two magnificent projects from the same well. That two of my favorite series that are both being continued today. It's like, what a monumental thing to happen when y'all were digging through that filing cabinet. It's just, and it still produces magic.
It was a life-changing moment, really. I mean, it was just that's everything turned. At that point, I had been writing, but I had been really writing nonfiction. I think I had a couple of short stories, or I was in the midst of doing my first short stories, or my first fiction. And fortunately, before I started really writing the novel, or finishing the novel, seriously, I was able to cut my teeth on a ton of short stories in very short order, and really kind of flex that fiction writing muscle and grow it, and have that preparation for writing the novel. And of course, I had the feedback from Phil and Betty, because I would send them chapters and get their feedback. So it was just a really great collaborative experience, a great learning experience for me.
Yeah, and it's since we're recording this episode now, almost in the middle of October, and I think this is a very appropriate piece of October reading. Wouldn't you guys say so, given its gothic type style?
Totally, yeah, that's a great point, Jason. So this was one of Phil's gothics, and I actually say one of because Phil obviously was a very well-known science fiction writer, but he did like to toy and mess around with other genres, and this is him doing that and having an immense amount of fun doing it. This was a gothic, and before I talk about this gothic, I'll actually talk about another gothic, which is I think it's very little known that Phil wrote another gothic. I see it as a gothic anyway. There's a very rare book he wrote that came out in 1970 called Love Song, and Love Song was published by Brandon House, which is one of the publishers of kind of that softcore smut. Some people will call it pornography. But Phil, when he submitted and when he wrote for the air quotes pornography publishers, he didn't write pornography to titillate. He wrote stories that for some reason had sexual content in them as a very valid and well thought out part of the plot, right? And so and there's some readers who have really reviled Phil for some of his work in this area. Feast Unknown, which is really a disturbing and yet Phil as being at almost his most trickster-esque, right? Book, Image of the Beast and Blown, also very disturbing, out of the same time period, kind of working with the same publishers. And then Love Song, which is really a gothic, but it's a gothic where he flips things on their ear, and he was always doing that. He was such an innovative guy. So in Love Song, the gothic, the premise is that it's the guy, it's the man who is basically sort of entrapped in this weird situation with these crazy women, and he's constantly trying to escape them. The classic gothic trope is that, young innocent girl gets, entrapped in some situation, and then there's a castle and it's dark and she's trying to get away and people are trying to do her in and are after her for some reason. In Love Song,
and she runs through the forest, and the brambles tear at her silky white blouse.
Yeah, my fellow writer Charles Rutledge, who writes in the horror area, calls it girl running away from house books, right? Because the covers always have these girls in nightgowns or dresses or whatever, kind of running away from this big castle where there's one light on up in the tower. So anyway, Love Song, great book, very rare. Definitely seek it out. Pemberley House was his other gothic. And this one is a little bit more classic in terms of its girl inherits this vast estate, Pemberley House. She has to travel from the United States to England. She's been orphaned. She's all alone in the world. She has nowhere else to go. She may as well turn to this and see, what this new life will bring her. And when she gets there, things go downhill from there, right? It just gets worse. People are trying to kill her. Everybody dislikes her because they think they should be the ones inheriting, not her. And there's a ghost. But is it a ghost? Or is it just made up? Are they just trying to frighten her away? How easily will she frighten, But the fun thing about this is, even though this is a little bit more along the lines of sort of the normal gothic tropes, it's Pat Wildman, right? The girl who's going to be running away from the house, maybe she won't run away from the house, because this is Pat Wildman. She's the daughter of the bronze-skinned pulp hero of the 1930s and 40s. So maybe there's a little bit more to Pat Wildman than your normal girl running away from the house. And that's kind of the premise of The Evil in Pemberley House.
Yeah, and there's also, besides the gothic setting to kind of draw you in, there's, as you said, it's very, very much in the Wold Newton universe. And if you're familiar with Farmer's broader Wold Newton works, there's reading this the first time I enjoyed it, and I really wasn't, but having since gone and read some other books and going back through The Evil in Pemberley House, and even these bonus materials that you guys have in the softcover edition now, it's just amazing how well everything connects in here.
Thanks. Phil gave me a great platform, right? And everything in the book, I really owe to Phil. I mean, I will say, there were a few things that I added in that were original to me, and I'm not going to get into, what Phil wrote exactly and what I wrote exactly, because it was collaborative from that perspective. But I did have the freedom to add some things in. But ultimately, this was Phil's book and Phil's vision, and it was, as you pointed out, it's very closely tied not only just to to the stories of the bronze superhero of the 30s and 40s, but also to the tales of a certain jungle lord who Phil wrote a biography about in the book called Tarzan Alive. I mean, it's extremely tightly connected to some background mythology from that perspective, and it's also very tightly connected to the canon of Sherlock Holmes stories,
and not to mention Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice,
and of course, exactly, Chuck, and of course,
and what makes that fun is there have been so many wonderful movie versions, showing Pemberley House, that when you're reading the book, it's so easy to see everything in your head. The long hallways and the
the big hallways,
it's all there,
and the paintings, the gigantic paintings and portraits of the ancestors, and the big huge picture windows and everything. Yeah, it's and along that line, after I had written it, I actually had the chance to go to England, and we went to a couple of the different estates where some different versions of Pride and Prejudice had been filmed. So that was very cool as well, too. And of course, we went to Wold Newton too, to see the site of where the meteor struck. And I guess we haven't really talked about that. So just in case there are some listeners who are, kind of wondering, well, you mentioned
for those who came in late.
Yeah, for those who came in late, what is it? Very briefly, Phil wrote these two biographies, and they're great books in and of themselves, just about these particular characters. But in the end papers or the addenda of each of the books, he then wrote these elaborate family trees, which are very well researched and make complete sense from a timing perspective of all the characters. They're true to all the characters he included. And he included a lot of really classic literature characters and other pulp characters and detectives and explorers in this family tree. And it's tied together by this event, which is a real-world event where a meteor fell at a tiny village called Wold Newton in England in the East Riding of Yorkshire on December 13th, 1795. And the ancestors of all these people in this family tree, they were there, and they were irradiated by the ionization of the meteor, and they were already extraordinary people. People like the Scarlet Pimpernel, people like Fitzwilliam Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, who were both there when the meteor struck, and then their ancestor or their descendants just became even that much more extraordinary. So that in a nutshell is the Wold Newton family. And
this was all explained in two magnificent books by Philip Jose Farmer, biographies. The first one was called Tarzan Alive. The second one was called Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life. And because he wrote these two books, Wynn and I and a group of us, you included, Jason, are all good friends because he wrote these books. We probably never would have met each other. We would not be doing this podcast today had Phil Farmer not written these incredible books.
Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
Like my and Wynn's friendship goes back all the way back to 1998. I mean, it's been a great ride, and it's not over yet. And it's like these books are just Pride. It really just took our young imaginations when we found these books as children. We didn't know each other, but just it was just, I just remember when I first saw that family tree, because I was already a big Tarzan fan, and just all of these great characters, that he had all these concepts about them. And it blew my mind. So I highly recommend these two books, Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life and Tarzan Alive. It's just so much fun.
And there have been some other Wold Newton books. So those are really sort of the nonfiction and the biographies, right? And then Phil decided to keep on using the concepts in his fiction. And there are several short stories which were collected in Tales of the Wold Newton Universe, which I co-edited with Christopher Paul Carey. That came out from Titan in 2013. Phil went back into, he delved back into ancient Africa, drawing on Burroughs and Haggard as his sources, and really outlined almost the prehistory of the Wold Newton world. And you guys already talked about that on a prior podcast, so I'm sure I don't need to go into that more. He wrote about Phileas Fogg. He wrote basically a secret history novel about what Fogg was really doing during the events of Around the World in 80 Days. He wrote a Sherlock Holmes book where Sherlock Holmes crossed over with a jungle lord who is probably pretty well known.
Along with several other really interesting guest appearances.
Yeah, a ton of guest appearances in that one. And then he was able to write two authorized books about his two greatest heroes. He was able to write an authorized Doc Savage novel called Escape from Loki, Doc Savage's First Adventure. And then he wrote The Dark Heart of Time, a Tarzan novel. And I think those were probably his dreams come true.
And the real cool thing about everything he did as far as with Wold Newton goes, you could correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe a lot of these books were being published through different publishers. And it wasn't until Titan, just, how many years ago was that, when they all came under one banner at one publisher. Well, not all of them, but as a good portion of the core Wold Newton material.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. As Phil wrote these books as standalone novels. That's a really great point to kind of go back and look at that from that historical perspective, Jason. Because Phileas Fogg, the other log of Phileas Fogg came out from Daw originally, right, in '73. Tarzan Alive was Doubleday, and Peerless Peer was yet a different publisher, and so there was no Wold Newton series, as it were. But really, when you look back on it now, there was a Wold Newton series. Phil was fooling us all the time. He just kept on writing different books in the series about different characters.
And that was part of the adventure back then for fans of this concept, because, Phil wrote several different series, but most of those series were labeled such, like the Riverworld series or the World of Tears, or the Day World
Day
series.
World.
But yeah, there was no official name for the Wold Newton series, but it was like, once you got into this concept, once you had read the Tarzan Alive and Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life, and then read the other log of Phileas Fogg, if you knew it wasn't a part of those regular series, you while you're reading and enjoy the story, it's a whole new level of enjoyment, because if you're in on the secret, you're looking for it.
Right.
You're like it's a whole different level of enjoyment for it, because you're looking for those clues. It's like, wait a minute. And sometimes it's something really obscure. So, I mean, because that was Phil. I mean, it would be just like a really obscure thing that would connect you, that would bring you right back into the game. And it's like so many books, when I first read Time's Last Gift, it's like, okay, I wonder if there's anything in here. And then it's like, zoing, it hits you. So many of his books are like that. I mean, of course, he's even threw stuff like that into the Riverworld. There was a character named Greystoke in one of the Riverworld books, but there's a whole different thing. But
Well, and I
so
think he
many
meant
of
that
his
to be the
short
actual
stories,
historical. He meant that to be the actual historical Greystoke
right,
too. So he's
right.
definitely
But so many of his short stories, just when it's like, is there one in here? Is it? And sometimes it's like almost a disappointment because you get to the end of the story and it's like, oh, I didn't see one, and it's possible that you missed it. But so many of them, it's like when we did our panel with Frank, one of my favorite, one of the books we discussed when we were discussing Philip Jose Farmer's Lovecraftian Weird Tales
yeah,
was The Freshman. And I remember when I noticed the name of a young African student who was there who came from a long line of witch doctors, and his name was Bukawai. And being a big, fan of the Edgar Rice Burroughs, it's like, he was the trickster. And it's
yeah.
like he set little it's like little mental landmines. It's like wait, and it's like, okay, is anybody? He knew some of us were gonna stumble on him. Some people would get it, some people wouldn't. Uh, you're talking to two of them that looked for him and saw him when they were there, and it's like an enhancement. The stories by themselves are already great, but this just adds a whole new level of fun to it. It's like sprinkles on, cookie crumbles on top of your ice cream. The ice cream's already great, but here's these crumbled up Oreos on top of it.
And that's what I would want to point out about Pemberley House too, Chuck, is that I've been told anyway, and the intent was that you don't have to understand all the backstory in order to read
Right.
it and understand the novel. At the heart of it, it's a mystery novel. I call it a genealogical mystery because the solution to the mystery actually hinges on genealogy and the relationships between people, right? And it's a little sort of ghost story, or is it a ghost story, or is it not a ghost story? So it can be read. It can be read completely straight that way, and then if if you're familiar with the Sherlock Holmes canon, then great. Then there's that little bit of enhancement there for you, right? If you've read some Burroughs, then awesome. There's some enhancement there for you. Again, obviously nothing that would violate copyright, and no Burroughs characters appear or anything like that. We would never do that, but there's little hints and nods here and there that hopefully provide a little bit of extra spice.
Right, and there's two ways to do that. You can either look for them yourselves, or we could direct you to the website of a friend of ours named Sean Levin, who will do all the work for you.
And that website would be
He's
crossoveruniverse.com. Yeah,
right.
Sean's a great guy, and he's taking over documenting all these crossovers with 2 new books that'll be coming out, Crossovers 3 and Crossovers 4. I actually did volumes 1 and 2, and it exhausted me so much that I'm very glad that Sean has taken up the baton here.
And Sean's hungry to do it, and he's got an eagle eye for
Yeah.
catching these things.
Yep.
Because it's like it goes beyond. Because there's a lot of writers in the new pulp movement that, whether or not they're even familiar with the Walt Newton family concept, they love to throw in little references to. It's like to the base, the whole concept. The way this is kind of played is, it's got to be a fictional reference in a work of fiction, but it's got to be referred to as if it's real.
Right.
Like anybody can say Sherlock Holmes, like no, duh, Sherlock, but it's got to if it refers to Sherlock Holmes as actually being a person who really lived in 221 Baker Street, then that's a connection. You can't just say, somebody could probably say Sherlock Holmes, they could be referring to the fictional character, but when they make it absolutely clear that they're referring to Sherlock Holmes was really a detective in England that was written about, then you got something.
Exactly.
And a lot of the writers in the New Pulp movement like to do that, little Easter eggs.
And that's all they are, right? They're Easter eggs. I mean, it's fun to tie them all together and then to sort of play this what if game. Well, gee, what if it really was all connected? And that's kind of what the crossovers books are about. They're, you know, kind of that 6 degrees of separation. Well, if this links to that, then wow, suddenly you have this big, huge tapestry, this really cool world where it's all interconnected. You know, some people really get into that. Others are like, I want my favorite pulp hero du jour to be completely pure and unsullied by the presence of others, and that's cool too, right? Like whatever, whatever floats your boat. We happen to like the all connected. It's all interconnected. There's a lot of secret, hidden Easter egg type stuff going on in the world.
The beauty of it to me, is that if you've ever read a series and then the author writes no more, some people might write like pastiches of it or something, but eventually after you've read and reread all these books, it's like you have to leave that world. You read all of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan novels, eventually you got to leave that world. If you're a fan of the Walt Newton concept, you never have to leave, because you could be reading a story that takes place in prehistoric time, or you could be reading a story that takes place in the 23rd century, and you're still in the same world. The characters that you love might be just around the corner. They might not ever show up, but they're just around the corner. And that's part of the appeal to me, is that you never have to leave this world. I read to escape the real world.
Yeah.
And this provides you with this wonderful way of escaping, and it's like this is the largest, and it's an unintentional, in a lot of cases, shared universe, but it's a universe, and you never have to leave it completely when you're reading a different book, and that's part of the appeal to me.
That's a great point. You know, and even that said, I mean, it doesn't necessarily go on forever. I mean, sometimes some crossovers are just, you know, they're so wild or crazy that you think once you follow a degree, 6 or 7 or 8 chains of degree, and then you're that far away from your first thing, and you look at where you are on link number 8, and you go, these two things, they don't work together in the same universe, right? They just,
right.
They don't make sense, and so Sean is very good about saying, you know what, at this point, this doesn't fit, right? Because we're still trying to maintain sort of this faux real world. It could have really happened here, and there hasn't really been all this socio-political or economic upheaval or whatever. And so at that point, you know, this story, it's too much. And he'll still document it because he's very thorough. And he'll put it in an alternate universe's addendum and say, you know what, hey, I knew about this crossover. I thought about it. I consciously evaluated it and decided that it didn't fit, but I want you to know that I did my research and it's here, and that's why it's in this other addendum rather than the main crossover's continuity.
Right. I've always liked to think of it as concepts that kind of cover their own tracks. You know, you think about somebody walking through the desert or something and sweeping behind them so nobody sees their footprints.
Yeah, that's a good way.
To me, it's the stuff that you've got like it's like you look at like the Tarzan novels or the Doc Savage. They have explanations for them. In the Doc Savage novels, they talked about, yes, there are pulp novels written about him, but you know, they could say, well, Doc Savage himself says they're kind of exaggerated. The Tarzan novels actually refer to Johnny Weissmuller once a time, said, yes, these movies are being made, but also the fact that to the world at large, they might have heard of, oh, they make Tarzan movies, but the world at large might not know that Tarzan actually exists and that there's an ancient city named Opar,
right,
with lost cities, and to me, it's there. Some of the debates we've had in the past, you know, people wanting to bring in, you know, superhero universes, you know, whole hog. To me, it's like, I've never liked that, because to me, Superman works because everybody knows Superman. You can't have Superman in a world, to me, where everybody, without everybody knowing that aliens exist. That, that seeing somebody fly overhead has become a common thing. And that works for the superhero universes, but it doesn't really work to me with the Walt Newton concept, because to me it's like all these things, like you can bring in Lovecraftian horrors, but in the Lovecraftian books, even within the context of themselves, these things happen in isolated areas and are easily covered up as... And this works. This usually works in the Walt Newton concept. And as far as the crossover universe, it's got to be to where fantastic, incredible things happen, but each time it happens in a story, people can still be in wonder of it. It never becomes a commonplace, ho-hum, old hat, here comes another alien invasion type thing.
Exactly. Or here's another city completely destroyed or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Except
you
in the
still
spider.
have the sense of wonder. You still have a sense of wonder, and when a normal human being witnesses something, it's still incredible. It
Right.
never becomes old hat.
Except in the spider, where New York gets destroyed every other novel.
And there's all kind of theories about that.
As our friend Rick Lay would point out to us. But but you can have Rick on; he can talk about that.
But things cover their tracks. I've always thought things like, I've been watching all the episodes of the DVDs of the $6 Million Man, and that show always covers its tracks. To the world at large does not know that there's a bionic man running around, and he's a guy walking around in normal clothes who does incredible feats and has incredible foes, but it never becomes commonplace. Nobody says, "Hey, everybody, look, it's the $6 Million Man."
And Bigfoot always covers his tracks.
Yeah. That was an episode I just saw the other day. And to me, that kind of fit. The $6 Million Man is pulp. It fits in a pulp world.
I agree.
But getting back to when Scott Eckert, my friend, he's been tying a bunch of stories in together. It's like Cthulhu's Tentacles. It's spread out through different stories from different publishers, and it's really a magnificent tapestry that Phil himself, I think, would love. I think he would. I can see his mischievous grin, from above whenever I'm reading one of Wynn's stories or novels.
He did have that trickster grin.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Chuck. That's nice of you to say. I've been throwing these hints in and these ties for as long as I've been writing and publishing fiction. So for 10 years now, and crafting these in all of my various stories, and of course the stories aren't written in chronological order, and they're written about different characters, and so, but there are threads that tie them all together, just like Phil was doing, and of course Phil was much more widely read, and had a much larger fan base than I do, so a lot more people were noticing what Phil was doing, even though, Chuck will say, well, we were all those loner kids and no one else had ever heard of Farmer. And yeah, right, that's true. But by the time we were all able to find each other by the late 90s, then there were a large number of us, right, who had this shared experience. I don't have any illusions that I have that many readers that as Phil did, but I'm still having a lot of fun with it. I'm carrying on Pat Wildman's adventures in a second book, which is authorized by Phil's estate, called the Scarlet Jaguar. And this is where she basically decides, she kind of had this horrific first adventure, but now she's really empowered, right? And she's taking charge of her own life and her own destiny now. And she's going to go out and be an adventuress and help people. Gather a little band of helpers and assistants and teammates with her, and and go around the world helping people and righting wrongs and punishing evildoers. But in the mid 1970s, so with kind of a mid 70s flavor, with the woman as the lead protagonist and the lead hero, and that again, that's the Scarlet Jaguar. That's out from Meteor House, and it's actually it was out of print as a soft cover in 2013, but it's coming back in print as a limited edition hardcover, and it's available for pre-order right now through the next couple of weeks, and then that'll come out late at the end of the year.
I had the honor. One of the Wynn actually wrote a prequel, a setup for the Evil in Pemberley House. It was published in the Farmer File newsletter, and I had the honor of doing some illustrations for that. It was done in the form of a Sexton Blake story, and he wrote it in that type of style, and I had got to have fun by doing illustrations in the style of the Penny Dreadfuls. Was it the Penny Dreadfuls or dime novels?
Yeah,
and
dime novels. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I got to illustrate interiors of Pemberley House and draw some of the scenes from the short story. I'd love to see that published again somewhere. Maybe when you come out with an anthology.
As a standalone, it would be interesting. It was incorporated into the novel Pemberley House, though. So
right, but it's still the fun of it. It's like in Watchmen when you actually get to read, just to read the whole Ancient Mariner stuff. Just it's the King in Yellow, as mentioned in the Lovecraft and Robert Chambers works. It's fun to actually, if you could read the actual play. This is a facsimile of the actual Penny Dreadful that's referred to in the story.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You'd like to see an actual facsimile edition put out. I see what you're.
Well, no, I'm saying I would like to see the whole, because there's everything that was in that wasn't in Evil in Pemberley House, was it?
Oh yeah, the whole story was in there. Literally the whole story.
Okay.
Yeah. So Pat finds the issue of the Saxton Blake magazine, and she reads it, and it's the whole story. The whole original story that appeared in Farmer File as a prequel is incorporated into the novel, and she reads it throughout the course of the novel, and it actually provides her some clues. So yeah, it's all there, buddy.
Okay, well then I change it. It's like, yes, it would be cool to make a facsimile of it.
Nice save.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. Chris Carey paid me a very nice compliment, an extremely nice compliment. He recently reread the book, and he said that the book is so meta that he didn't even really recognize how meta it was when the first time he read it. But it's meta without being pretentiously, which I just thought was a huge compliment.
Well, it also does not. It's like we were talking about earlier. With Phil, it doesn't. I mean, you could be absolutely clueless to the secret game and still love the story. You don't have to be knowledgeable of the Easter eggs, and then also the Easter eggs don't get in the way of it. It doesn't become the thing.
Yeah. That's the key. That's the key about writing like this. You're absolutely right, Chuck. Don't go overboard.
It serves the story. The story doesn't serve.
Yeah.
Right. The story doesn't.
Easter eggs that you're not telling a story. Tell the story first.
Right. It's like when we were having a discussion the other day. People accusing Phil Farmer of being a porn writer. No, he would use those elements to serve the story. The story wasn't there to serve those elements.
Exactly. exactly.
And to me, that's the difference between pornography and whatever.
And speaking of
Uh,
which, just for readers who haven't read Pemberley yet, and I hope you will. I hope you'll go out and grab it as a fan of as a potential fan of a daughter of a pretty prominent pulp hero. But fair warning, there is some graphic sex in there, and that was directly from Phil's writing and from his outline. And we discussed whether we should take that out, and at the end of the day, Phil and I agreed that, and it was a pretty intense conversation. Some other people were present for that too, and it was pretty hotly debated. But at the end of the day, Phil and I agreed to leave it in. It was as written as he intended, and the sex scenes serve the plot. They're not gratuitous. They're not just thrown in there because a publisher demanded a certain number of sex scenes per 20 pages or whatever. They serve the plot. They're critical to the plot. And now, whether they're well-written sex scenes or not, I will not say that one way or the other because, I, I'm not going to evaluate. I'm not going to evaluate that. But they're meant to serve the plot, and in my opinion, and Phil's opinion, they do. All that said, though, with the Scarlet Jaguar, there were some hints of some very, very light hints of 1970s, sort of sensibility, sexuality, but nothing that graphic in Scarlet Jaguar.
No,
yeah,
it's
fill
steamy.
in your own. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah. Well, what was that, Jason?
I always I always describe the Scarlet Jaguar as being steamy, not as Pemberley House. It's erotic, gothic erotica, but the Scarlet Jaguar, I've always found it to be more like a almost like a James Bond type novel. Ian Fleming,
Yeah.
Raymond Benson.
Right.
Something like that, what they would write.
Yeah, they hint at it. What's going on. It's not explicitly written and described.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's fair. It was really interesting because I got this really long fan letter probably about 3 weeks ago from someone who had written to me about both Pat Wildman books, and Brendan, if you're out there listening to this, I absolutely promise I will reply to your email. It was a really well thought out email and critique of the books, a positive critique of the books, but a well thought out analysis nonetheless. And he was actually encouraging me to go back and do a little bit more of the explicitness in follow up Pat books. Not sure if I'll go that route or not, but it was interesting. That was an interesting perspective that this person brought to the table.
Huh.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about the plot of the Scarlet Jaguar?
Yeah, so it's several months after the events of Pemberley House, and so Pat and her sometime lover, Parker, who is really a character who stays with Pat from the first book. They've set up this investigatory agency called Empire Investigations, kind of named after a building in New York that her father used to reside in, and they basically are sort of drawn into this mystery where people are being very weirdly vaporized, and there's this head of a screaming jaguar sort of floating in the air above them after people are being killed, and as it turns out, they need to go on this mission to Central America to investigate what's going on and try to defeat this villain who, frankly, could potentially take over countries or maybe even the South American continent if they can't kind of get a handle on this weapon is. what this weapon is. Um, it becomes pretty clear that they have some loose ties to the British Secret Service. So in the interim, Pat has had a couple of untold adventures where she probably did a couple of missions for the Secret Service as a freelancer, not as a full British agent or anything like James Bond at all. We also meet, we meet again a character who's appeared in some other stories. We meet Pat's sort of air quotes great aunt, Violet Holmes, and Violet is a quite handsome middle-aged lady, middle-aged by the mid 1970s, and she is the daughter of one of the former heads of the Secret Service, M. But not the M you're thinking about, a different M, Mycroft Holmes. And this kind of ties in with the long-running theory that has been that's appeared in actually several books and sort of been alluded to, that Mycroft was the M before the M that we all know and love in the James Bond novels.
It's a very popular theory that more than one people have used, including Alan Moore.
So Alan Moore used it. A writer named John, I'm going to mangle his last name.
Lescroart?
Yeah, Lescroart, something like that. He wrote 2 Nero Wolfe books, but I'm not writing about Nero Wolfe books. In the 1980s, called Son of Holmes and Rasputin's Revenge. And Son of Holmes, took up the popular theory that Nero Wolfe was the son of Sherlock Holmes and Irene Adler. And by the way, I'm one of those people who completely buys it. I love that kind of stuff. And in that, he also had a little footnote that Mycroft was the M before Sir Miles Messervy of the Bond books. So that was super cool.
Yeah, it's a great fit.
Yeah, I think Kim Newman may have played with that as well too. But I can't remember whether he actually had Mycroft as M or Mycroft just as the head of the Diogenes Club in the teens and the 20s. I think that may have been it.
If Frank was here, he'd remember. Frank. Frank. He and I discussed Kim Newman on the last podcast, the last episode.
Frank, where art thou?
Yeah.
Why could not Frank join us tonight?
Well,
I'm just kidding, buddy. We miss you, Frank. So anyway, those are the kinds of hints and the kind of tidbits that I like to throw into the books. And in the Scarlet Jaguar, I bring back a character that really we just saw a paragraph about in Pemberley House. A character named Helen Benson, and Helen ends up joining Pat Wildman's team. Hopefully, that's not a spoiler for the Scarlet Jaguar. I'm trying not to really reveal too much about it. But Helen is also the daughter of actually 2 pretty well-known pulp heroes. Again, if you've read these pulp heroes, you'll recognize them. We're not going to name names, and obviously those pulp heroes are, or at least one of those pulp heroes is owned by another owner, and so we certainly wouldn't infringe on any marks or any copyrights there. But this is an entirely new character, and I think she's a fun character who will add a lot to Pat's team. Helen Benson.
Oh yeah,
her father's great complexion and her mother's body.
Yep, definitely.
And she's also, is also a great juxtaposition. She's a great juxtaposition herself to Pat Wildman, to where they complement each other. Very two different types of adventurers that complement each other, but there's a contrast there that makes it more fun. They're not cookie cutter adventure heroes. They've each got their own strengths and it's not a generic, you know, GI Joe adventure team where everybody's GI Joe. It's like there's a great contrast between the two, which I think Wynn has a lot of fun writing.
Yeah, I don't want to write the same character in the same book. That's for sure, Chuck. So that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with Helen. I love Pat. Obviously, she's she's the main character. She's the lead protagonist. But boy, it's a lot of fun to create these other protagonists too, and really flesh them out, as it were.
A cliche way to say it is Pat is the sun, and Helena is the moon.
That's one way. Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's one way of putting it. Heat and cold might be another way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Mr. Heat Miser. Yeah, Heat Miser and Cold Miser. Yeah. No, but they're also longtime friends. They've known each other since childhood.
Right.
And they grew up under similar. There's things that they can relate to that not many other children growing up can identify with. It's a very, very rare thing to be the children of these type of parents. So this is so they grew up knowing each other and having a shared experience that not many people have. That's one of the things that I love about it.
Yeah, and I'll be exploring that in future books. One thing that I won't be doing though, just to kind of set any fears or any concerns to rest, that the book series is not going to become the Pulp Heroes the next generation, right? I've got two who are next generational. Then I do plan to add in more teammates and more supporting characters, but I'm not going to keep on going to that well. That you can only go there so many times, and I've got two daughters of two famous pulp heroes now, and that is plenty. Phil actually did it himself with another pulp hero named Kent Lane, son of the pulp hero. His character was named Kent Lane, and he appeared in a story called Skinburn, which is a great little short story. It also appeared in Tales of the Wold Newton Universe, and I do plan at some point on writing a Pat Wildman Kent Lane short story. But I don't feel like that's going to the next generation well too many times. Kent Lane already exists. Phil already wrote him. Pat already exists. She's already been written about. It's kind of a natural to bring those two characters together for a little short adventure. Probably will not be a full novella, but other than that, I think I'm going to stay away from any more of the sons or grandchildren for a while.
Right, and one of the things we've talked about before is, and it's a mistake I've seen other people try to do, is it's great to have a once in a blue moon team up, but you can't. It would just completely destroy. These characters do not work as a Justice League type situation. You can't. I mean, even if you were to try to go back to the 30s and have a league of pulp heroes, there might have been one or two times where they might have all teamed up. But the problem is you can't have one character playing second banana to another. In a world where a certain Jungle Lord should never be the second banana to a Man of Bronze and vice versa. There could, I just don't see there ever could be a normal team, a team that, an organized team with officers or whatever, because they wouldn't do that. I
agree with that. I agree with that. I think a one-time event, with some of them might be cool, where they all come together to fight one menace, but frankly, the problem with superhero teams is that there are so many of these menaces out there in the comic book worlds that call for these teams to come together on a regular basis. It's like how many how many world-shattering, only a full team of superheroes could save the Earth? How many of those menaces can happen before it, kind of gets old? Right, to your point,
Right,
John.
but also as far as like a good characterization, uh, somebody has to suffer. It's like I remember somebody bringing up the fact that if you look at the old uh, Looney Tunes cartoons, stay with me here, Looney Tunes cartoons. If you look at how Daffy Duck, the character, was portrayed before they started regularly teaming him up with Bugs Bunny. Daffy had this whole, hi, I'm weird, I'm crazy. But when they teamed him up with Bugs Bunny, he became a foil.
Mm-hmm.
He basically became like an egotistical thing that Bugs Bunny would mock, and to make Bugs Bunny look cooler. The same things with Donald Duck and Mickey teaming up regularly. You have to alter the personality of one to make it fit into a normal relationship dynamic. And to me, that's one of the when I've seen people try to attempt to take the pulp heroes and put them into a team situation. That's the problem. Is they start watering down the heroes because somebody's got to be the alpha dog, and that's why these heroes can't travel in a pack, because none of them is going to stand. Is not you can't have an alpha dog in a pack
Well,
like that,
and
because they're all alpha dogs.
Phil Farmer faced that quandary, and I think he handled it very intelligently, right? So he
Right.
had his bronze hero and his jungle lord hero, Lord Grunneth and Doc Caliban, and he did his pastiche team up, or battle come team up, and it was called A Feast Unknown, right? But when he wrote his follow-ups, Lord of the Trees and The Mad Goblin, he very wisely separated them.
Right. It was this. They were on the same. They were involved in the same adventure,
but on different paths. And
that was perfect. That's the way you do it.
Right. And then they briefly intersected here and there, and right at the end, at the battle royale at the end. But they were still fighting their own battles in that battle royale, right?
And one of the things, Wynn is doing such a good job with this. In Wynn's stories, there is a in a majority of his stories, in the background, pulling strings, there is a particular menace. Sometimes in the foreground, sometimes in the background. That a lot, and it's a reoccurring thing. In a lot of his stories in different publishers. But so essentially, it's all an interconnected adventure with a particular adversary, and that's the beauty of it. Is if you read Wynn's stories, you'll find the character I'm talking about. Sometimes he hints at who it is. Sometimes he's blatant about it. Sometimes the character is right out there in the open saying, hey, yeah, this is me. But sometimes it's like, oh, there he is. And it's wonderfully done, because it's like, this is all, since this guy is like manipulating all these things, it's like it makes it kind of one big adventure, even though it's not, with various known heroes, and unknown heroes, but they're all interconnected because there's this one adversary that they're all facing it in different eras, in different places. And that's one of the things that makes it so exciting, is that it's a long saga with, okay, what is this guy doing now? What is this adversary doing now?
Not too many people have noticed that, Chuck, and that's. I always get a real thrill when someone starts to read multiples of my stories and then goes, oh, wait a minute, holy cow, it's all connected. And I think maybe part of the reason is, all right, so I've written, I was super lucky to be Kenneth Robeson for a while, right? And name Kenneth Robeson wasn't on the front of the books, but it's kind of a running joke. You know, Kenneth Robeson was the house name for Doc Savage, and he was the house name for the Avenger pulps. And I was very lucky to get to write 3 Avenger short stories, which I made into a trilogy of stories. They're all connected. And there's a recurring villain in those. But if you're only a fan of the Avenger, if you're not a fan of Win Scott Eckert or Wold Newton, but you've only read the Avenger, you probably won't read any of my other stuff, and you won't pick up on this. And that's okay, right? It's cool, because those stories still stand alone on their own. But, you know, if you also happen to be a Honey West fan, and, you know, I don't know how many people are Honey West fans and Avenger fans. No idea. But if you happen to be a fan of both, you might find some pretty significant connections with this recurring adversary that Chuck is talking about. And again, these are work for hires, so you know, Condé Nast owns those Avenger stories and that character in there. But the wonderful thing about a character who is extremely long-lived is, you know, in order to live all those countless hundreds or maybe thousands, or even if it's just decades, I'm not going to say how long, got to be changing your identity here and there, right? I mean, there's no way you can keep on living past a normal lifetime and you know, not change your identity so people don't get onto your trail. And so that's, you know, a lot of different publishers, as Jason and Chuck said, and a lot of different characters, but there's a lot of connecting threads in all of my stories.
Definitely, and that goes back to even some of your first work that came out from Black Coat Press, the Tales of the Shadowmen days. Do you want to talk about those stories?
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun with those. At that time, I was really focused on writing Doc Ardan stories, and so for the first 3 Tales of the Shadowmen books, I wrote Doc Ardan stories. And Doc Ardan is kind of the French stand-in for the bronze-skinned pulp hero of the 30s. Really, at the end of the day, he's the same as Doc Wildman, you know, Phil's version. Although, you know, a public domain version of Phil's version. But I kind of equate my Doc Ardan, at least the Doc Ardan stories that I write, I equate that Doc Ardan character with Doc Wildman. And by the second story that I was writing, I actually knew that I would be writing The Evil in Pemberley House. And so I actually took the opportunity to introduce Pat Wildman's mother in the story, and then I carried on with the story of Doc Ardan and Pat Wildman's mother in the story in Tales of the Shadowmen 3. So the first story was The Eye of Aran. It was in Tales of the Shadowmen Volume 2, and then the next story was Les Levres. I'm sorry, I don't speak French, so you French speakers out there, my apologies in advance.
Last episode, I did the really bad French accent. This time it was Win. Okay.
It's called the story's called Les Lèvres Rouges, Red Lips. That's in Tales of the Shadowmen 3. These take place in the late 1940s, and so the timing is perfect in terms of being precursors to the Pat Wildman stories. And they actually, in these, or at least in The Eye of Aran, they face another recurring villain who I use a lot. Not the other one I was talking about, but a villain called Dr. Natas, who the folks at Black Coat Press have sort of hypothesized is really another alias for Dr. Fu Manchu. Again, in no way saying that we are writing authorized Dr. Fu Manchu stories. We are not. Dr. Natas is an Asian mastermind, a criminal mastermind. If you'd like to squint and think he's Dr. Fu Manchu, you're certainly welcome to do that. And
it's from a really fun novel.
I'm not going to tell you.
Originally from the French. What?
Go ahead.
No, I'm saying the Dr. Natas was in a really fun novel called The City of Golden Lepers.
Yeah.
Yeah, really for Black Coat Press. I highly recommend it.
That was a fun book, and that was actually a real pulp book that came out in the late 20s or the early 30s by Guy d'Arman. And the folks at Black Coat Press translated it into English and, kind of put it out there as, hey, this could really... So Dr. Francis Ardan was the character, and he battled Dr. Natas, and folks at Black Coat Press were saying, this really could be sort of the French Doc Savage versus the French Fu Manchu. And we kind of ran with that in my own Doc Ardan stories.
And, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
This will also kind of touches back on Pemberley House, too, because there's a scene when Patricia first, I believe she's at a train station.
Yeah.
And she meets a Asian gentleman on the train that seems to know who she is, but she doesn't know who he is.
That is absolutely true. That is
and
exactly
if you read
right.
these stories, it kind of explains who he is and why he would know who Patricia is.
That's exactly right. That's a great point, Jason. Yeah,
It's the first big. I think to me, it's like the first really fun Easter egg in the book.
that one did come pretty early.
And it's such a great visual because it's like you can picture it. It's so cinematic. The scene is so cinematic. Hold on, Mr. G is banging his bowl around. I'll be right back.
Okay. And the Asian mastermind character in that scene is also in custody on the train.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And is it Sherlock Holmes who has him in custody? An elderly or very well preserved Sherlock Holmes, or is it Sir Dennis Nayland Smith who has him in custody? It's not exactly clear. Holmes and Nayland Smith both, share many of the same physical characteristics, so the description really applies to either one. It could have been either one. And of course, as Phil said in his genealogy, Nayland Smith was the nephew of Sherlock Holmes. Even Nayland Smith would have to be very well preserved. But there are a lot of immortality elixirs. There are a lot of varieties of elixirs in the Wold-Newton continuity.
Definitely. And I'm sorry, I cut you
There
off.
must be 50 ways to keep on living in this concept.
Did you say 50 or fishy?
I was trying to make a pun on the Paul Simon song, but it just never came to fruition like I wanted to. So I kind of gave up. I lost steam halfway through the joke.
We'll give you
I
that
hadn't
one.
said anything.
We'll give you that one.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock this morning, I'll wake up with the perfect way I could have said it and start kicking myself for why I didn't think about it then. But for now, I'm just letting it go.
And then we'll all pine.
It's a learning experience.
Fishy's actually works too. What is it? The Eye of Iran that has deep ones in it. So
it does.
Yeah.
The Eye of Iran has deep ones in it.
One of those deep ones. It's like I always take pride in the first story that Wynn had published. He kills me off. He based the character on me and kills me off in a particularly nasty way.
Was that the
character
first
Carl?
one? Wasn't that
the first one?
Was that the first one or the second? The second one.
I thought it was in the first one. It was
no, it was in the third one. It was in the third one, Chuck.
Really? Okay.
In the vampire one. It was in the...
I thought it was in the one with the deep ones.
Maybe it was. Well, that's the second one then.
Yeah, because Carl gets that.
Innsmouth, that's right.
Innsmouth thing.
Yeah, no, you're
Carl
right.
And
it was
Dinny.
the second one, but that was my second. That was my second story. My first story was The Vanishing Devil, which was also Dr. Mann versus Dr. Natas.
And that was.
Did you kill any of your friends off in that one?
No, I was too busy writing my first story.
Okay.
And that first one is your first one, The Vanishing Devil. That's pretty much a direct sequel to The City of Gold and Lepers. Isn't that right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. That's really where Doc Ardan and Dr. Natas are really facing off, and Natas is coming back specifically after Doc Ardan, as well as bringing up some other characters from City and Golden Leopard.
Oh yeah. Okay, I remember now.
Yeah, and that one also connects to probably my favorite comic series of all time, The Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. If you can believe it, it connects to that in a way that I'm pretty happy with.
That's going
It's
to
hard,
be
it's hard to talk about this stuff and make it intriguing without giving away spoilers.
right,
Right.
right. And then the other, let me know if I skipped any, but the next thing that's coming to mind is your collaboration with Christopher Paul Carey, Iron and Bronze, which is also a Doc Arden story, right?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So that was Doc Ardan and Harriton Ironcastle, and I wanted basically Chris and I approached that from I'll write the Doc Ardan stuff, Chris you write the Ironcastle stuff. We'll kind of alternate scenes, and then we'll merge it all together. I mean, we had an outline, and we knew this scene will be a Doc, that one will be Harriton, and we'll stitch it together. But I think it came together pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that one.
And once again, like we were talking about earlier, two great heroic alpha dogs that maintain their integrity by keeping them apart as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the Ironcastle was a direct link back to another Wold Newton novel by Phil, also, which was entitled Ironcastle. Actually, that was a collaboration with Phil and a French science fiction writer named J.H. Rosny. And Rosny was actually the original author of Ironcastle. When Phil translated it from French to English, it was he basically added in sort of an initial chapter and a concluding chapter that had some Wold Newton-esque references, and therefore by those editions, it became a Wold Newton novel.
Well, another one of those books that when I found it, and seeing those references in there just, gave me goosebumps because it's like, there it is. Okay, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Great stuff.
Saying how Harriton Ironcastle's cousin is a certain Professor Porter.
Yes,
that was all great. Yeah, all great stuff.
In a certain club.
Oh yes,
a certain club meeting place.
It was the Baltimore Gun Club, wasn't it?
Yep.
Right.
So, Jason, you've written a Doc Ardan story.
I have, yes, and it actually does deal with both Harriton Ironcastle and the Baltimore Gun Club in the opening scene for it.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's coming out in Shadowmen 12, right?
Yeah, Tales of the Shadowmen 12, Carte Blanche. It's going to be out in December here, and it's going to have Doc Arden travel to the North Pole to investigate the disappearance of a team of Arctic explorers from a novel that Blackcoat Press put out a couple years back, translated by Brian Stableford. It's Charles Duranis' People of the Pole.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, it was fun to write, and I really enjoyed Iron and Bronze by you and Chris, and I thought I saw a little bit of an opening in there that I could get in there and work with a little bit as far as the relationship between Arden and Ironcastle.
That's very cool. I mean, that's what we also love about this is Phil planted these nuggets for us, and if we can say we've done the same now and we planted a nugget for someone else, that's just amazing to me.
And also the way that within our group of friends, we work together and build on what each other has done.
Definitely.
And the crazy thing is initially, back in the heyday, as I put it, of the nonfiction articles, we were doing that with nonfiction articles, and they were published on websites, right? And they were, each genealogical article, speculative article, was kind of built on other ones, or not, right? Or if they were not, they were said, well, I respectfully disagree with my colleague because here's the evidence I'm going to bring to the table, or whatever. But now it's happening with the fiction, right?
Right.
And that's just mind blowing to me. That Chris and I could write a story that would, 6 years later or whatever, inspire Jason to write a follow up, and kind of, not a direct follow up, I'm not saying, but to take nuggets from that and kind of be inspired by that to a certain degree is just,
or to the
cool.
other extent. It's like I get a particular thrill. The probably the Wall Newton article that I'm most known for is one called The Daughters of Greystoke. And once in a while, I'll read something that you are it's not even necessarily that. I've written several articles, but I've been reading a book by you or some of our other friends where they'll do a little tip of the hat to my theory. And I get such a kick out of that. It might not be a blatant thing. It might be just kind of a very subtle thing, but it's like I'm reading a book, and Wynne Scott, the author of the book, is winking at me. In the book, and I just get a kick out of that. It's like, thank you.
Yeah, I like to tuckerize people when I can slip that in. It's a lot of fun. So back on the Pat Wildman stuff, just before I'm not sure what kind of time we're looking at here, Jason, but I did want to mention that that right now Meteor House is running a bundle deal on both Pat Wildman books, so the Pemberley House in trade softcover and the hardcover of the Scarlet Jaguar novella. If you order them both together, assuming you haven't gotten either of them, and you want to get both books, if you order them both together, I think it's like $5 off. And then if you also order the follow-up Phileas Fogg book, which Meteor House also published, it's called Phileas Fogg and the War of Shadows, and it's a sequel to Phil's other log of Phileas Fogg. And it's written by a great writer named Josh Reynolds, who just did a bang-up job on it. And if you haven't gotten that, that's also available in a limited edition, Phileas Fogg and the War of Shadows. It's almost kind of like a Tales of the Shadowman-esque type of novella, featuring Phileas Fogg and some of the French villains from the serials, like Irma Vep and the Vampires. It takes place in Paris, and that's also part of the package deal. So if you go to Meteor House website, you'll see these package deals available. And
if you order within the next 10 minutes, you'll also get this free set of Ginsu knives for slicing, dicing, and circumcising, and even making julienne fries.
I'm sorry. I'm being so much of a huckster here. I apologize.
No, I just wanted to say, I haven't said anything funny this podcast, and I wanted to say something funny.
It's meteorhousepress.com. So the full website is one word, meteorhousepress.com. Okay, sales pitch over.
Yeah, no.
I just wanted to say something funny, but it is really a great deal. These are all of these books. Or the Shadow War of Phileas Fogg is really fun. It's really fun, and once again, it has nice little cameos and guest appearances for people who are well versed in literature and adventure fiction, and I highly recommend it. It's a nice companion to Wynne's books.
Definitely,
it's a perfect bundle.
And we should probably touch on one more aspect of Wynne's work, before we end this, and that would be it's another kind of sub series within the greater Wold Newton universe, the Wold Newton Origin series,
Ah,
because
yeah.
that recurring villain that Chuck was discussing, um, we'll just call him the Wild Huntsman. His fingers are all over that sub series.
Yeah, that's true. Uh, so the Wold Newton's Origin series started with, and by the way, you did a great podcast on this a week or two ago, Jason, called "Is He in Hell?" Um, the,
Thanks.
the series started with my story "Is He in Hell?" Which comes from the poem from the Scarlet Pimpernel. Um, um,
They seek him here.
yeah, they seek him
They
here, they
seek
seek
him
him there.
there.
They seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven? Is he in hell? That dim, delusive pimpernel. And in this story, we actually we almost literally take the Scarlet Pimpernel to hell. So that was the inspiration. But it's called Wold Newton Origins because it, Phil told us that these 18 people and these two coaches and some people on horseback were at the Wold Newton event, but he didn't tell us why. Like, what brought them there? Uh, it had to be more than they were just passing by on their trip, because honestly, I've been to Wold Newton, and by the way, people who live in Wold Newton might, by some freakish chance, listen to this podcast. I love Wold Newton. We stayed overnight at Wold Newton at the Wold Cottage. Love Wold Newton. It's not on the way to anywhere, though. So, what were these people doing there, particularly in 1795? They had to be there for a reason. And that's what these stories are about. So, Is He in Hell kind of gives Sir Percy Sir Percy Blakeney, the idea, oh, I think I need to have a gathering of people, right? There's a great evil in the world, and we need to be thinking about combating this. The story picks up again with the Wild Huntsman, which is the next story, and it really does take place literally during the 3 days up to and including the Wold Newton meteor strike. And I don't know, this one may be the story which I don't know. I'm happy with a lot of my stories. Everything really came together with this one.
When it's a masterpiece.
Oh,
The
thanks.
Wild Huntsman is a masterpiece. I remember because this was like, I remember when you first told us this was coming out. We were all waiting with bated breath because, this is the thing. This is the event. This is what this whole hobby, this whole passion is based on. You are answering. You're asking more questions, but you're answering some of the biggest questions, and you're actually showing the event, not just as Phil did, reporting on the event. You are having an actual adventure based around this event, and you did not disappoint. It was from the incredible illustration that Jay Piscopo had in the book to the story itself. It's just a masterpiece. It did not disappoint. It was everything I wanted it to be and more.
Well, that's good, Chuck, because I'm really glad to hear you say that, because it certainly could have disappointed, right? I mean, it's the Wold Newton event. It's the thing that started it all. So I'm glad it didn't disappoint.
And it's one of these stories. Every time you read it, you see a little surprise that you didn't catch the first time. I was like, I remember it was like after I had read it, I had gone back and I had read Pride and Prejudice a long time ago, but I had recently watched the BBC production with Colin
Firth.
not Colin, yeah, and
Yeah.
it was like, and there was this one character that that you did something kind of fun with in there that was like, oh, okay, and it was like so it's just it just made it that much more fun. It was like, okay, and I enjoyed both it made me enjoy both Jane Austen even more, and it made me enjoy your story even more. And that's one of the things we all joke about is like Phil Farmer tricked a lot of us into being literate. I don't think many of us in this game would have read Pride and Prejudice had it not been for Tarzan Alive and Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life. He
that's
tricked
true.
us,
Yeah.
and I wound up really enjoying that book. It's like usually, that's something that your girlfriend or wife enjoyed, but it's like, oh, I'm not going to read it. But it's like, no, I really enjoy that story. It's a very deep, multi-layered story, Pride and Prejudice is, that I would not have enjoyed had not Phil tricked me into reading it.
And by the way, and when he tricked us into reading it, then I went off and I can't say I've read all of the Jane Austen books, but I did read a couple of the other ones too. Northanger Abbey, I really enjoyed. So, yeah, he definitely was a door opener, as Mike Croteau likes to put it.
When you discuss Phil, the word trick and trickster, is always there because he was the trickster.
So this one, The Wild Huntsman, was really special to me because not only was it the origin of the Wold Newton family, and they were there, and they actually had an adventure there, and there was something happening there. There was action taking place there, and would it happen? Would it not happen? But Phil also created an immortal time traveling hero who's part of the Wold Newton universe, part of the Wold Newton continuity. And I found a way to include that character, and I tied it together to a series of his that takes place in a parallel universe, or at least most of us fans think it takes place in a parallel universe. It has a lot of similarities to the Wold Newton universe, and was able to bridge that series too. So to me, the Wold Newton, that story, it kind of takes place in two series. It's part of the Wold Newton series, but it's also part of the Secrets of the Nine series. Secrets of the Nine is A Feast Unknown, Lord of the Trees, and the Mad Goblin, which we were discussing earlier. It has Phil's pastiche characters with Lord Grunneth and Doc Caliban. And again, many of us think those pastiche characters kind of coexist in a parallel universe.
And you're actually...
And judging by clues that Mr. Farmer himself left, I believe that is the case.
Yeah, I do. I feel pretty strongly. I feel pretty comfortable with that theory. I agree with you, Chuck. I feel pretty strongly that's the case.
And you're actually working on the fourth book in that series, aren't you now? When?
I am. So Phil, he wrote The Monster on Hold. He wrote
one of the most so ironically named.
Yeah, it has been on hold. So he wrote the first chapter of A Monster on Hold, and he gave a speech at the 1983 Worldcon where he kind of described some of the events of the book that would lead up to this chapter, and then he actually read this chapter, and then it was published in the Worldcon booklet, and there it has been for 32 years, and so basically all of 2016 is going to be devoted to me finishing the book. Again, based on what we know, what he said the book would be about, the chapter that he's written, another chapter, which we found in the magic filing cabinet, which will be incorporated, as well as other of his notes, which will help guide me. And basically all of 2016, that's what I'm doing. That's what I won't be taking on any other writing, gigs or anything. I'm going to be completely focused on the novel, which means I need to wrap up a couple of things quickly this year and get those done. I'll be writing an Avenger novel, kind of similar to what Matthew Baugh has done for Moonstone with his great book, The Sun King. I'll be writing an Avenger novel also, and I'm gonna get that done here in the next couple of months, and then I'm gonna focus completely on Doc Caliban, The Monster on Hold.
Cool. Yeah, and that reminds me. We we didn't really talk about your Moonstone pulp hero work, but needless to say, that's all connected too. If you see Wynn's name on a Captain Midnight anthology, a Lone Ranger
Zorro.
anthology, Zorro, um, it's there's the Phantom. Uh,
Wynn created an original character for his Zorro story that I really would love to see again.
So that was El Halcon, and that character. I then went back and from that. So that the story was Zorro's rival in More Tales of Zorro, which was the second Zorro anthology from Moonstone. And then after that, and I always knew this. I always knew who this character was. I just had to go back and write the story. That's the thing. I always have the backstory. It's just a matter of then going back and actually writing the backstory. So I wrote the backstory origin for this character in what I like to call my Wold Newton Sideways tales, which was called Violet's Lament, and that appeared in Tales of the Shadowmen, Volume 9. So the Wold Newton Sideways books take place concurrently with the official Wold Newton Origins books, or stories. And by official, I mean the official Wold Newton's Origins stories. These are licensed by the estate of Philip Jose Farmer, right? So they're using the characters and the concepts that he created by name in Tarzan Alive and in the Doc Savage biography, right? Because he did invent some characters for the genealogy in order to fill holes, and so I'm absolutely using his theories, bang on his made up characters, bang on. And in the Sideways tales, I try to write them in a way that would not violate Phil's copyright, right? So they still take place in the same time period, but they're with side characters and situations that I didn't need to seek license approval from Phil's estate from. And so those stories appeared in Tales of the Shadowmen 7, 8, and 9, and were called Nadine's Invitation and Marguerite's Tears and Violet's Lament. And Violet's Lament was basically that origin story of that character in Zorro's rival. So, like you guys were saying, it's all connected. Someday I probably need to write it all down, but I don't know if I would actually publish that because half the fun is other people figuring it out for themselves.
yeah,
Yeah, we've talked about that before. It's kind of like how we haven't really let. I think what's cool what you're doing is you're answering questions, but you're asking new ones. When you and Chris both, you're answering some of the questions that Phil left behind, but at the same time you're asking new ones for other people to. And see, that's the thing. It's like sometimes I pity because of the website and the crossover books that you did and the ones that Sean are going to do, that Sean is working on. It's like it's almost like we've taken away, what we experienced because we didn't. It wasn't spelled out for us. We had to work to get it.
That's true.
and
That's
it's
true.
it almost is like it's like they're not gonna exercise their brain. They've still got the wonder and the awe of it, of how cool this concept is, but they didn't earn it like we did. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of the reasons we're friends, because yeah, that's like it happened with us. It was like in that when we found each other when we grew up. It's like I remember, hey, did you know? Yeah, I did know that. Hey, did you know? It was like this is stuff that we had all arrived at independently, and it was literally like meeting, like we were all separate. We all came from another planet, and were dispersed throughout the globe, and then we all found each other. Because I could tell you, it's like I would try to talk to other friends of mine here and try to explain to them this thing I was passionate about, and they would just stare at me blankly. Even
Well,
people who were
yeah.
familiar with these pulp heroes, like, I don't get it, Chuck. I don't get it. It's like, but it's the coolest thing in the world. How can you not appreciate this? And then I found your website around 1997 or 1998. It's like, and then the little clique we formed. It was like, it was so cool because it was like meeting people that spoke a language that you spoke that nobody else would speak, and it was just a magnificent thing.
Well, and that's actually, you're right. And that's actually why I did document it because it hadn't really all been documented in one place. There had been the Wold Atlas fanzine in the 70s, which I never even knew about then.
Right.
And even though it does kind of peel the layers of the onion back and it makes it easier for the people who are following, I almost had to do that because I think it wouldn't have carried on, right? Like people were reading those novels at the time they came out, like you and I were for the stories, and then seeing those connections and not having anybody else who understood it to talk about it with. But it wasn't
Right.
after Phil stopped writing, then those books and novels then just kind of go onto the used bookshelves, right? So the chances of other people having even that shared experience, even though we all had it separately, the chances of people having that experience again were almost slim and none. It almost had to be documented in a place to actually explain it to those people who just wouldn't get it. Like, no, right. Like if you go read this book and then you read that book and then you read this book, you can see the whole story of this one thread and how it carries on. And then people are like, oh, now I get it.
Right.
And then there are the people who just, don't get it at all. And that's okay. That's cool, right? It's not for everybody. It's an acquired taste.
He named it. Phil, he named things that would become ironic. The Walt Newton hobby is literally a feast unknown.
It is. It is. It is a feast unknown.
But it's a feast for us. It's one that we continue to devour and consume and appreciate and love.
Yeah, definitely, and it's great that Titan did their part. They put out all that Wold Newton material and all that Philip Jose Farmer material, and Meteor House. They're still, putting out new Philip Jose Farmer related fiction, and even reprinting some of his classic tales. And really, right now, it's a great time to be a Philip Jose Farmer and Wold Newton fan.
It really is, and we're having a ball with it. I was pleased to be involved with the Titan reprints. I'm pleased to be involved with the work that Meteor House is doing and helping get these books out, as well as actually writing some of them. Chris Carey is doing amazing work with the Ancient Opar / Empire of Kokarsa series. We were able to bring out a deluxe edition of Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life with some restored text from Phil's files and some great bonus features in a deluxe hardcover. Chris did a magnificent job at locating and restoring some text to the second Kokarsa book, Flight to Opar. So it really is, right now, it really is a feast. And may the feast continue.
Here's part of the fun is like I was talking about here locally where I live in Shreveport, Louisiana, trying to explain people, about Walt Newton, them staring at me blankly. It all came full circle several months ago when Wynn came to town and he and I went to we did a Walt Newton presentation at one of the Shreveport libraries with a PowerPoint presentation and everything. It was like it all came full circle for me from having this passion to that hobby that no one understood. The climax, I believe, was when I got to go to Farmer's house and meet him and his beautiful, wonderful wife Betty, and then all the way back to Shreveport, Wynn and I doing a presentation at a library. It's just been such a fun ride, and it's not over yet.
Yep, very cool. Well, guys, I think we covered a lot of ground this episode. And what I'm going to try to do is I have show notes on pulpcrazy.com as well as YouTube. And I'm going to try to make a list of where you can get all of these stories that Win has written that we talked about. I believe, I'm thinking most of them are actually in print now. Just off the top of my head, I can't think of any that aren't. Either through one publisher or the other. And I'll stick those in the show notes.
I'll send you a link to my bibliography page on my author site.
Okay. And what is your website?
Sure. It's www.winscotteckert.com. That's WINSCOTTECKERT.com. It's all one word. I'll send you the link, and then I'll send you the link to the biography subpage on that site. And that should I think it's very up to date in terms of links both to print versions as well as Kindle or Nook versions for anything that's still in print.
Excellent. And I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would you say would be a good first story written by you for a new reader to check out? What would you recommend?
For a good introduction story and again, I really try to write everything so that you don't have to know all the continuity. The Easter eggs are just that. But to even make it that much more sort of simple, straightforward, just straight ahead pulp story, I would recommend my first Avenger story, Death and the Countess. I think maybe that's a good sort of straight ahead pulp pot boiler to start with. Yeah, I think I'd go with that one. Maybe maybe the first to Doc Ardan, but that one has a little bit more continuity in it. Of course, in the back of the Tales of the Shadowmen books, there's always a character guide, right? So that's always very helpful. But for the straightforward pulp action, I would go with the Death and the Countess in the first Avenger book. That's the Avenger Chronicles, published by Moonstone Books.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. That is because that's one of the first stories that I've read of yours. And yep, I can definitely attest to that one.
Cool. And I would recommend, after you've read the Pat Wildman books, reading his Green Hornet short stories, because there's some things you'll get in those stories that you might not fully appreciate had you not read the Pat Wildman books.
Right. Yeah. There's a real cool cameo in one particular one, for sure.
Yes. And they're all just great reads. I mean, especially when you're Wynn did these licensed characters, the Green Hornet, the Phantom Zorro, and the Avenger. He did them very well, and they're just rollicking, great adventure yarns. All the elements you love in a good pulp style adventure, they're in there. Wynn knows what's fun. Wynn knows the kind of stuff that you crave in these types of stories, and he understands what's fun. And he knows how to use them. And it's not just him throwing something against the wall to see if they stick. They're finely crafted stories. They're very enjoyable. They're meat and dessert, and I highly recommend them. They're packed with vitamins.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'd like to thank Win Scott Eckert and Chuck Loredons for being on. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate that.
Hey, Jason.
Hey,
Thanks so much for having us. I always enjoy talking about this stuff, and it's great to talk to you. And always enjoy seeing you at Pulp Fest, and I also appreciate Chuck chiming in with his commentary. We've been at this a long time, so yeah, it was a lot of fun. We should do it again.
Oh yeah, we're definitely gonna be doing this again. Once again, thanks to Win Scott Eckert and Chuck Loredens for joining me this evening. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. My YouTube channel is located at youtube.com/pulpcrazy. You can also email me at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.